And now for the second part of 4-4, we have marine ecosystems. Marine ecosystems are immense and deep. The ocean covers over 70% of planet Earth. They're very vast and they contain lots of life. Within the marine ecosystems, they can be divided into two separate zones. You have the photic zones, and photos means light, and these are just areas where photosynthesis is possible, and there's light penetration. That light will only go down to 200 meters at its maximum, and this is in crystal clear water. Now, below that aphotic zone, or below that photic zone, we have the aphotic zone, which is permanently dark, and it must get its energy from chemosynthetic organisms, or it can get different carbon compounds that come down in the water from up above it. We're going to divide the ocean into four major parts. Here, the book only divides it into three. And the first one is going to be the intertidal zone. And the intertidal zone is the area where we have sometimes exposed to water, sometimes it's exposed to air. It's the area between high tide and low tide. Then we also have the Neritic Zone, which is just past that. The Neritic Zone, also known as the coastal ocean. And then from there, we have the Bathyal Zone. The Bathyal Zone is going to be your open ocean. And then we have the Abyssal Zone, which is also known as the Benthic Zone in our book. As for the intertidal area, these areas are areas that are exposed to either the air, oxygen, or they're exposed to water because of the tides. This is between high tide and low tide. Sometimes these places have up to 2 tides a day. Some places only have 1 tide. One of the things that you see in these intertidal areas is something called zonation. And zonation just means it's just banding of life forms in the intertidal zones. And this zonation is caused by competition. And there's different organisms that prefer different amounts of water and different amounts of air throughout the day. And because of that, you have different organisms living at different parts in the intertidal zone. The ones that like lots of salt water are going to be a little bit closer to low tide. The ones that like lots of air but a little bit of salt water are going to be closer to the high tide mark. Now, the next place out is going to be the coastal ocean or the Neritic Zone. And this is all the way from the bottom of the low tide mark, the absolute lowest low tide mark, to the edge of the continental shelf. And this is usually in the photic zone. Sometimes it is below 200 meters and it's out of the photic zone. And this contains those great kelp forests that we see here in the Pacific Northwest and also in Alaska. This is where your bull kelp is going to grow. All of those big bull kelp and those big bull kelp that you see wash up on the beach, those grow in the coastal ocean or the Neritic Zone. And those can grow up to 50 centimeters a day. They are incredibly productive and they can grow very fast. And this is what a kelp forest looks like from down below. And these, again, are the things that wash up on our beaches here in Kodiak. Another example of kelp forest here with other types of fish that are floating in it. I'm going to take you back to this picture, or excuse me, I'm going to take you to Google Earth real fast right here. As you can see, this is the Pacific Ocean. We have Alaska, and we have Kodiak right here. If we zoom in on Kodiak, we can see the continental shelf right here. The continental shelf is basically an area of shallower water. And the continental shelf is actually all the way through the Bering Sea, all the way over here, and extends on the Alaska Peninsula. However, just south of Kodiak, not too far, that continental shelf will eventually start to drop off in a very steep cliff. But this area right here is going to be your coastal ocean zone, and this is where a lot of that different a lot of the bull kelp is going to be growing, and especially in the shallower areas. Let's go back to PowerPoint, and let's talk about coral reefs. Coral reefs, they typically, you see them in warm, shallow waters, but it does not need to be warm, shallow. We do have coral reefs here in Kodiak, but it does need to be shallow because they do need to get that light. But it can happen in cooler areas. And coastal oceans support these coral reefs. Coral reefs are made from a calcium carbonate shell, and the organism that makes them is one that is related to jellyfish. It secretes its shell around the body, and it makes those very interesting patterns that you see, and it makes all those great colors, and it makes all those really beautiful coral reefs that you can see. Here's some pictures of coral reefs right here, and that's just the calcium carbonate shell where the organism lives. That's not the actual organism. Now, what a coral reef? A coral reef is actually, the organism that lives in it is a symbiotic relationship that it has with algae. And the algae carry out photosynthesis using the coral animals' waste as nutrients. In turn, the algae provide their coral hosts, with certain essential carbon compounds. Um, because those algae are photosynthetic, they need to be within 40 meters of the surface so they can get that light. And again, here's a picture of a coral reef right here. And remember that the shells are actually calcium carbonate and the organism lives inside the shell. And there can be thousands or to millions of these organisms living in these coral reefs. Next, we have the Bathyal Zone. And the Bathyal Zone is basically going to be the steep cliff before it goes to the abyssal ocean. So just off of Kodiak, our Bathyal Zone is going to be from right here down to right here. Let's go back to PowerPoint. Within this Bathyal Zone, it's with the edge of the coastal ocean, right to the base of the continental shelf. This can be anywhere from 200 to 2,000 meters deep. The waters here are going to be very turbid and murky, and the reason why they're turbid and murky is because you have numerous landslides that happen underneath there. And when you have those landslides, a lot of very fine sediment falls down the continental shelf, and it doesn't exactly fall to the bottom very fast, and it stays suspended in the ocean because those particles are so fine. They're not heavy at all, and they like to float up. As you get to the lower parts of this, you have very high pressure due to all the water above it, and you have numerous burrowing animals, and they burrow into the continental shelf, and they can create little homes in there that provide them with protection from predators. And then finally, we have the benthic zone, or we have the abyssal plain. This is open ocean. This is below 2,000 meters. It's very dark down there, and the organisms that live there are called benthos organisms. Things that where you get your nutrients from, you get your nutrients from two different sources. You have organic rain. Organic rain is just any kind of organics that are coming from above that are coming down through the ocean. That's one source of energy for the organisms that live there, but you also have thermal vents, and thermal vents provide energy through chemiosynthesis, and they use different chemical compounds, inorganic chemical compounds that can provide energy to those organisms. And here is a slideshow of pictures of organisms that live in the benthic zone. Notice the lack of pigment because you can't really see a whole lot down there. However, some of them do create their own light through a process. Right here is an almost octopus-like organism that does create its own life. Bioluminescence is the name of the quality of organisms, name of the quality for organisms that produce their own light. Bioluminescence. Bio meaning living, luminescence meaning light. There's a squid right there, bioluminescent, creates its own light, and it uses that as an attractant, but also as a deterrent too. Type of fish. This right here is a deep sea vent. Deep sea vent, what it is, there's many organisms that will live it. They're chemiosynthetic organisms at the base of the food chain. What they're doing is they're taking those inorganic carbon compounds that are coming out, inorganic compounds that are coming out of the earth, and they're converting those into carbon compounds, or they're using that energy for growth and reproduction. There it is again. Other organisms can eat those producers, and that creates the base of the food chain. And that concludes our lecture.